Welcome to episode 65 of the World Builders Anvil. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's topic, the World Builders Anvil visits Earth. Yeah, Earth. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Okay, welcome back. And first off, I'd like to give a special shout out to the Fallout series Wicca, a great resource for Fallout, which is going to be the focus on my visit to Earth, because Earth, as you know, is not a fantasy fictional realm. However, it is the host of many fictional stories, and the version of Earth I want to Fallout is that from the Fallout video game series. And I also want to give a great shout out to nexusmods.com. I've linked to one of the images from their website, which I love from Fallout 3. Image I've seen way too often. And now, to give you the basics, Fallout, if you can't get it from the name, which it could be tricky, it's a post-nuclear Holocaust world. Earth, specifically. I believe most of it's taking place in the United States. It'll be interesting if at some point they're going to expand out to different parts of the world. There are 3 main games right now. Fallout, Fallout 2, and Fallout 3. And there have been some other games, tactics games for Fallout. And also Fallout New Vegas, which is another company taking the Fallout 3 engine and doing their own thing with it, which was also a fine game. And the biggest thing that you need to understand if you're not familiar with the Fallout world, think 1950s super crazy propaganda films that you might have watched or have heard about, but in the 22nd century and beyond. Okay. Now, one of the things I do like about Vegas are that there are essentially races. There are all forms of mutant creature on the Earth. There are ghouls, which are essentially long-living humans that have been irradiated to the point they look like zombies. They are well loved in the Fallout universe. Humans and super mutants, which are the other, they're sort of the anti-humans. Yeah, not really. But yeah, no, they're the big bad guys in the game series, or amongst the big bad guys. So far, the main games have taken place in California, Oregon, the Capital Wastelands, and in the Mojave Desert area. And there are actually little bits and pieces that go out into even a little bit different places. And there's talk about Massachusetts, which some people think is going to be the center for the next Fallout, which would actually be super cool. But those are the 4 main areas. Yeah, you can go to the pit, or you can go into Maryland, but that's insular. And actually, technically, you can go to Maryland either way. You actually visit Bethesda Software's headquarters in Fallout 3, which is really kind of cool since they, make Fallout 3 and 4. Interplay made the original games. Great games. But now you're asking, why do I think this world works? It's Earth. It's a blown-up Earth. If you've watched a Mad Max movie, you get kind of the idea of the flavor of the world. It's like everything's a desert because of radiation. Rain might happen, but water is not necessarily safe, and it's probably not, especially if you get around the Capital Wastelands where everything was super nuked around there. Not so bad necessarily in other parts. Actually, in New Vegas, there's a lot of fresh water that isn't tainted, which is kind of cool. The area wasn't nuked as heavy as, say, like Southern California or Washington, D.C. But what really makes it work is there are some new factions that grew up, and they're interesting. It's not that. It's the learning about the history of the world, through bits and pieces of things that you can find. What happened, what caused the war that ended the United States. And you start learning all of the subplots with that. How different factions build up in different areas can be interesting too. Whether you have the New California Republic, and excuse me, and I like it because the bear has been mutated on the flag. Or it's Caesar's Legions or Kaiser's Legions, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave. You have these factions that start building up, and then you have a lot of like free cities that you will either get pulled under the control of these larger groups, or they'll actually be completely ignored, or they'll be an area where no one even wants to go to, because there's a lot of wasteland. There's this idea of vaults as well, which are the super massive, powerful, special fallout shelters that were created throughout the United States, and there's always ones mixed in. I think in every other game I've played, the hero was from a vault, and the games that followed them, the hero was not from the vault. And I'm not sure about New Vegas, but if I remember correctly, you don't start in a vault in that game. It's like you've been shot, and that's how it starts. But it's the bits and pieces you learn, and there's a lot of fun wrapped in when you get these little bits of propaganda, from the into the United States that led up into the nuclear war, which I believe took place at the end of the 21st century, I believe, like 2077, that range. And the games themselves start a couple hundred years later. And the idea of karma and the importance of karma and how your actions kind of lead you down good or bad paths. And those have consequences throughout the game. If you're a bad guy, there are places you can go that you couldn't go as a good guy, and vice versa. And you actually start being hunted down by the other side. At least in Fallout 3 and in New Vegas. I don't remember if you were hunted down in the other games. I don't even remember if the first game might not have even had karma, but that idea really worked in. And they bring a lot of neat details with books that are created, and the books can help improve your characters. Not quite as good as the books, I think, from the Elder Scrolls games. And that's just because the books don't have actual text you can read, which some of those are very amusing in the Elder Scrolls games. But they give you abilities. At the beginning of Fallout 3, you're creating a character by reading a children's book, which I thought was very cool. But it's sort of the way they take the old and bring it back in, and they reuse it, they scavenge, they tear the world apart, the older parts, to try it and build themselves a little better day. This is not a major topic here. There's not a lot new to Earth. Yeah, there's some strange little critters, and there are raiders and stuff like this that happen. Kind of stuff that you'd expect if you've seen Mad Max movies. That kind of stuff is going around on the surface too. But that's not really what enthralls me in the game. It's the exploring and finding the little details and figuring out how to get around in a world that's been devastated, which hopefully I'll never have to figure out. The world building task for the day. Could you build a post-nuclear Holocaust world differently? And this kind of leads me to my pet peeves of post-nuclear Holocaust worlds, or most things that are post-Holocaust. The problem with all of these things are, what they don't take into account is that the human knowledge from before does not disappear. You find all kinds of computers. I don't know why humans aren't doing new construction. 200 years afterwards, why are all of the cities still husked ruins? To me, and I don't know how long it would take with the radiation, but at some point, as soon as possible, especially in areas more remote from the explosions, humans are going to start trying to rebuild from what they remember. They're going to be gathering and feeding information into themselves, and there are going to be problems with scavengers and raiders, but over time, you're going to have communities and societies reform. And what do those look like? And the games, Fallout does get a little bit into it, but I don't think they do enough with it. And they lose too much of the old technology, and they don't explain why don't we have cars again. And sometimes you'll see super special craft from before or that have evolved a little bit since, but they don't explain why the humans that are around are settled in patheticness. And they're not striving to rebuild and reshape the world either in new techniques or taking from what was lost and going with it. And I think from what I've seen in post-nuclear Holocaust, that's always been my problem. Is you walk into a town, it's a bunch of burned out buildings from the war that have, had some wood slapped on the roof again. And That's not a harsh critique because they're exploring, humans destroying themselves, and it's sort of the whole Gothic idea. After the Romans were destroyed by the Goths, we'll never recapture that level of society. I hope we never have to find out, but I don't think that's true. And I could be wrong. And these kind of stories are very popular, so what do I know? The real world task for the day. When you fall behind, like I've been over the past almost month now, and I've been really edging these episodes out at the end. You got, especially if your time's full. So try and utilize the time you can to the best of your ability. Like tomorrow, I'm driving with my wife for a short trip up north, and I'll be having my laptop with me, and I will have notes. I'm filling out a questionnaire to help take my first book through editing, and I need to get that done, and I've not been able to get that done yet, and it frustrates me. So I'm gonna take the questionnaire and fill out with me along the way. And I gotta get a lot of stuff kind of caught up this week. The tease for this episode: Monday, we will be talking about world building questions. How do I build a fantasy calendar? And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to, and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.